While Iran dominates the headlines, the Bible had already predicted it. Every movement, every alliance, every threat, and every crisis was written more than 2,500 years ago, in a book that many people have at home, but very few truly read deeply. There is a map of this nation's future. And the most shocking part is not that this map exists, and the most shocking part is that we are living inside it right now. Right now, as world leaders meet in emergency rooms, as markets shake, and as generals move pieces on a board that the whole world watches with fear. The prophets already described this exact scenario with a precision that has no rational explanation. Think about it this way. Imagine someone 2,000 years ago wrote you a letter describing exactly the day you are living today. The countries involved, the alliances formed, the conflicts ignited. The names are slightly different but recognizable. The intentions are exactly the same. What would you call that? Some call it coincidence, some call it forced interpretation, but you cannot ignore the data that is right in front of your eyes. Now, before we go further, drop a comment below and tell me, do you think what is happening with Iran right now is connected to Bible prophecy? Yes or no? I read every single comment. In 2024, Iran launched more than 300 missiles and drones against Israel. The world stopped. It was the first time in modern history that Iran directly attacked Israeli soil. Analysts said no one saw it coming. The prophets did see it coming, and what they described happens after this moment is even bigger, even more impactful, and it directly affects the future of the entire world. That is exactly what we are going to explore today. We are going to open the pages of Ezekiel, Daniel, and Isaiah. We will connect ancient words with what is happening in 2026, and we will discover what the Bible says about the end of Iran as we know it today. But more than that, we will discover what all this means for you, for your life, and for your purpose at this exact moment in history. Because if something brought you to watch this today, I do not think it was an accident. Stay until the end. What we reveal in the final minutes is crucial. If this content speaks to you, hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss what is coming next. To understand the fate of Iran, you first have to understand something that modern history almost never mentions. Iran is not a new country. It is not a nation that appeared on the map in the 20th century like so many others. Iran is the direct heir to one of the most powerful empires that ever existed in human history. Persia. At its peak, the Persian Empire controlled 44% of the entire world's population. No other empire in history ever reached that number. Not Rome, not the Mongol Empire, not the British Empire. Persia was the greatest. And it was not just a military giant, it was a nation deeply woven into biblical history. It appears in the books of Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. It is one of the most mentioned nations in the entire Bible, and every single time it appears, it plays a crucial role in God's plan. Now here is the first thing that will surprise you. The year is 539 BC. Babylon, the most powerful city in the known world, falls in a single night, not through months of siege, not through an epic battle, but because a Persian king named Cyrus the Great diverted the Euphrates River. He sent his soldiers through the dry riverbed under the city walls and entered the heart of Babylon while the people inside were celebrating a feast. That is documented history. But what almost no one mentions is this. 150 years before Cyrus was born, the prophet Isaiah wrote his name, not as a vague prediction, not as an allegory. He wrote his actual name. He said, a king named Cyrus would free the people of Israel and order the rebuilding of Jerusalem. God called him my shepherd and my anointed. in Isaiah 44:28. Look it up right now if you want. A name written 150 years before the man was even born. How do you explain that? That is the first big sign that Iran, or Persia, as it was called then, is not a minor actor in the story of history. It is a central protagonist. And if it was central in the past, the prophecies suggest it will remain so until the very end. But here is something very few people know. There is a passage in the book of Daniel describing a vision the prophet had while he was in Persia. A vision that left him without strength for days and made him fall to the ground. He described it as something no human could bear to see. What did Daniel see exactly? He saw two animals colliding, a ram with two horns, powerful, charging toward the west, north, and south. No animal could stop it. It did whatever it wanted and became great. A male goat, coming from the west with such speed that the text says its feet did not even touch the ground. It attacked the ram with great fury, broke both its horns, and trampled it completely. This vision was interpreted by the angel Gabriel directly inside the text. The ram with two horns, Gabriel said, represents the kings of Media and Persia. The goat from the west is Greece. That clash happened exactly as described when Alexander the Great destroyed the Persian Empire in the 4th century BC. Now, if that part was fulfilled with such precision, what about the other prophecies regarding Persia that have not yet been fulfilled? Because there is one in particular, in the book of Ezekiel, that gives everything we are seeing in the 2026 headlines a completely new meaning. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever read Ezekiel 38? Let me know below. Ezekiel was a prophet who lived in the 6th century BC. He wrote during the Babylonian exile, at a time when Israel did not exist as a nation, when Jerusalem was destroyed, and when the Jewish people were scattered and living in captivity. From that place of total desolation, Ezekiel wrote something that seemed completely impossible. He wrote that in the latter days, Israel would exist again as a nation. The Jewish people would return to their land after centuries of being scattered. And once that happened, a coalition of nations would come against Israel in a massive attack. Israel became a nation again in 1948, after nearly 2,000 years. And that fact alone is one of the most extraordinary events in all of modern history. But what Ezekiel describes next is where everything becomes urgent. The prophet speaks of a leader named Gog from the land of Magog. He speaks of a coalition of nations that will unite under that leadership to attack Israel. And among those nations, Ezekiel explicitly mentions Persia. Persia is Iran. It is named alongside Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, and other nations that biblical scholars have identified on the current map of the world, all located in the Middle East and Central Asia. Now look at what is happening in 2026. Iran has active military alliances with Russia. It has armed Hezbollah in Lebanon. This phrase appears more than 70 times in the prophetic books of the Bible. It is not a decorative phrase or a poetic metaphor. It is a technical term in Hebrew prophetic literature that describes a specific period of divine intervention in human history. A moment where the order of the world, as we know it, is transformed permanently and irreversibly. The prophets described it with images of nations at war, cosmic upheaval, judgment on the powerful, and restoration for the humble. And almost every prophet who describes it connects it to one central geographic point: Israel, specifically Jerusalem, and specifically a conflict involving the nations surrounding it. Israel. Now look back at the map of 2026. Iran has publicly declared multiple times that the state of Israel has no right to exist, and that its long-term strategic goal is the elimination of Israel as a political entity. This is not an interpretation, it is official policy, declared publicly by its own leaders. At the same time, Israel has a military doctrine known as the campaign between wars, a strategy of constant preemptive strikes against Iranian military infrastructure in Syria, against Hezbollah weapon depots, and against armament programs across multiple countries. It is a war that is already happening, just in silent mode. The prophets describe that this silent mode will eventually explode into something that will no longer be silent. But here is the part that will make you think the most. In the book of Zechariah, another prophet who wrote after the Babylonian exile, there is a description of the end times that includes something extraordinary. It says that in that time, Jerusalem will become a cup that will make all the surrounding peoples stagger, and that all the nations of the earth will gather against it, not some nations, all. Zechariah says that at that moment, God himself will intervene, protecting the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He describes the attackers being consumed by a plague, in terms that some have compared to the effects of nuclear weapons. These details are deeply unsettling when read in the technological context of 2026. Now, I want to be responsible with you. I am not telling you that the end of the world is tomorrow. I am not telling you that the war of Ezekiel 38 starts this week. I am not here to create panic or fear. I am telling you something different. And more important, I am telling you that there is a recognizable pattern, that the convergence of events we are living through has a meaning that goes far beyond politics. If the prophets were right about Cyrus, the fall of Babylon, the return of Israel, and Alexander the Great, then their words about what is still coming deserve to be taken seriously. And I am telling you something else. The purpose of knowing these things is not fear. The purpose is preparation, not the preparation of bunkers and supplies, but inner spiritual preparation, clarity on what truly matters, focusing on the eternal over the temporary. The prophets did not write their visions to paralyze people. They wrote them so people could see beyond the apparent chaos and find an anchor in something more solid than circumstances. That is what this knowledge offers you. But there is still one piece of the puzzle we have not mentioned yet. A piece that connects everything we have seen with something happening inside Iran itself right now. Something international media barely covers. Something the prophets, in a surprising way, seem to have anticipated as well. It is perhaps the most hopeful sign of all those we have explored today. There is something happening inside Iran that the world needs to know. Since 2019, Bagutimi, and with greater intensity since 2022, with the Woman, Life, Freedom movement, Iran is experiencing something that no authoritarian regime can completely control: an internal awakening. Millions of people, especially young people and women, took to the streets to challenge a system that has controlled every aspect of their lives for over 4 decades. They did not do it with weapons. They did it with their bodies, their voices, and a courage that made the entire world stop and watch. And here is something very few people know. Iran today has one of the highest rates of Christian growth in the world. That is not a typo. Iran, the Islamic Republic, the country that punishes religious conversion with severe penalties, has one of the fastest growing Christian communities on the planet. It is completely underground, is completely clandestine, but it is completely real. It is estimated that between 500,000 and 1 million Iranians have converted to Christianity in the last 2 decades. Some studies suggest even higher numbers, and the growth is accelerating every single year. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you know this was happening inside Iran? Most people have no idea. Why does this matter in the context of prophecy? Because in the book of Isaiah, chapter 19, There is a fascinating prophecy about Egypt that describes a spiritual awakening within a nation that had historically been an adversary of Israel. The pattern it describes, suffering that leads to seeking, seeking that leads to an encounter, and an encounter that leads to transformation, is exactly the pattern we are seeing in Iran right now. People living under oppression find God in ways that comfortable people would never understand. Furthermore, the prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 49, has words about Elam, the territory that today corresponds to the western part of Iran, including the area where Iran's main nuclear reactor is located. Jeremiah speaks of judgment on Elam, but then he also promises something surprising. But in the latter days I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord. Judgment followed by restoration, breakdown followed by rebirth, darkness followed by light. This pattern is consistent throughout all biblical prophetic literature. No nation appears in prophecy only under judgment without there also being a promise of redemption for those within that nation who respond. This completely changes the narrative, because the story of Iran in the Bible is not simply the story of an enemy, it is the story of a nation that has been at the center of the divine drama from the very beginning, playing roles of both antagonist and instrument of liberation, and its people at this moment in history are experiencing an unprecedented spiritual awakening. That is powerful, that is hopeful, and it leads us to something I want you to take with you, regardless of what you think about prophecy or politics. The moments of greatest darkness in history have always coincided with the greatest spiritual awakenings. It is not a coincidence, it is a pattern that repeats over and over again. When human systems fail, when institutions prove fragile, and when temporary power shows its limits, something deeper emerges. People begin to search with an honesty that comfort never produces, and that search always leads somewhere. The question is, where is it leading you? Because there is one final dimension to all of this that we have not explored yet, the most personal and urgent one, the one that connects the great events of the world to your specific life, your decisions today, and your purpose at this exact moment in history. This is the moment where most videos of this type leave you alone with the information. They give you the data, the quotes, the analysis, and then cut. End of video. See you in the next one. But that is not enough, because the truth is, you can know every prophecy in the Bible and have absolutely nothing change for you. You can have all the information and continue living exactly the same as before. Knowledge without transformation is just entertainment. And this topic deserves more than entertainment. So let me ask you a direct question. When you see the news about Iran, about the Middle East, about the conflicts that seem to accelerate every year, what do you feel? Anxiety? A comfortable distance? Paralysis? Confusion? Most people swing between two extremes. They either obsess over the news to the point of distress, or they disconnect completely because the weight becomes too much. The prophets offer a third way, not obsession, not disconnection, but perspective. The perspective that the events of the world, no matter how chaotic they seem, are not out of control, that there is a pattern, a purpose, and an intelligence that transcends governments, armies, financial markets, and news cycles. And that perspective does not make you passive, it makes you free. Free to act from clarity instead of fear. Free to live with purpose instead of anxiety. Free to be part of the solution instead of just another victim of the chaos. Now let me give you something concrete. The prophets we studied today, Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, Zechariah, were not passive observers of history. They were people who lived in the middle of tremendously difficult circumstances and from that place of difficulty found a clarity that sustained them. Daniel was in captivity in Babylon, far from his land, far from his family, subjected to a system that tried to erase even his name, changing his Hebrew name to a Babylonian one, attempting to redesign his identity from the inside. And yet, the text says that Daniel purposed in his heart not to compromise himself. He made an inner decision that no outer circumstance could reach. That is what prophetic perspective produces, not indifference to the world, not spiritual escapism, but a root so deep that the winds of external chaos cannot pull you out. What does that mean practically for you in 2026? It means that in a world of misinformation, your first responsibility is to seek truth with genuine intellectual honesty, not just consuming what confirms what you already believe, but truly searching, questioning, and going deeper. It means that in a world of collective anxiety, your calm and grounded presence is a gift to everyone around you. People who understand the pattern do not need to panic, and that calm is contagious. It means that in a world that feels fragmented and meaningless, there is a larger narrative available to you, one that connects the past, the present, and the future. One that tells you that your life is not an accident, that you are here at this specific moment in history with a specific purpose. And it means that the spiritual awakening happening inside Iran, those hundreds of thousands of people seeking something truer in the middle of darkness, is a reminder that spiritual searching is not a luxury for quiet times. It is exactly what is needed in difficult times. More than ever, you who are watching this video, who have come this far, who took time out of your day to explore these deep questions, you are already part of that awakening. Do not underestimate it. The knowledge you seek, the connections you try to make, the questions that keep you up at night about purpose and pattern and meaning, that is not ordinary intellectual curiosity. That is the soul searching for an anchor in a world that moves too fast. And the anchor exists. We have traveled a long way today. We talked about empires that fell exactly as predicted, about coalitions forming in real time before our eyes, about a nuclear program that fits with chilling precision into patterns described 2,500 years ago, and about a silent spiritual awakening inside the very nation that headlines only describe as a threat. We connected the ancient with the current, the geopolitical with the spiritual, the external with the internal. But there is one prophecy I want to leave you with at the end, and it is not the one you expect. It is not from Ezekiel, with his visions of armies and coalitions. It is not from Daniel, with his kings and kingdoms. It is from Jeremiah, a prophet who did not see spectacular visions, a prophet who cried, who doubted, who at one point told God he did not want to keep speaking because the weight was too much. A completely human prophet, and from that place of total humanity, he wrote the words that have perhaps been repeated more than any others in the entire history of faith. Through Jeremiah, God speaks to a people in captivity, people who had lost absolutely everything: their land, their temple, their identity, their visible future. And he says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope." Jeremiah 29:11. Stop for a moment in that context. Those words were not written for comfortable people. They were not written in a time of prosperity and stability. They were written for people in captivity, people who looked around and saw absolutely no evidence that things could get better, people who had watched their cities destroyed, their families scattered, and their entire known world disappear in a matter of years. And into that context of total desolation came the most radical promise possible. There is a plan. There is a future. There is a hope that does not depend on circumstances. That is what the prophecies about Iran, about the Middle East, about the events of 2026 offer us. When we read them with the right eyes, not terror, Not the dark satisfaction of watching disasters be fulfilled, not the intellectual pride of someone who thinks they cracked the code of the apocalypse, but something far more valuable: perspective. The perspective that the world is not out of control, even when everything we see suggests otherwise. The perspective that there is an intelligence operating behind the visible, weaving a pattern that looks like chaos from the inside but has a recognizable shape from the outside. The perspective that even the nations that seem darkest have people inside them who are desperately searching for light. Iran will stay in the headlines. Prophecies will continue to unfold. History will keep moving toward where it was always moving. But you can walk through all of it with firm feet, with open eyes, and with a heart at peace. That is the promise. That is the most important prophecy of all. Not the one of judgment, but of restoration. Not of chaos, but of purpose within the chaos. Not of the end, but of the new beginning that always comes after. If this video gave you something genuine today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what impacted you the most from everything we covered today? I read every single comment. Like this video, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Keep searching, keep going deeper.